Welcome to the Unraveling the Scriptures channel. The United States of America, known as the land of opportunities and a nation with great ethnic diversity, has a fascinating history regarding the origins of its inhabitants. Have you ever wondered about the ancestry of the people who call the USA home? According to accounts from sacred scriptures, the inhabitants of the United States are considered direct descendants of Noah through his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. In this video, we will explore the ethnic origins of those who came to America, as well as those who were already here. Many Americans believe they do not have a specific origin, but in this presentation, we will investigate the genetic connections of the United States of America as described in the scriptures. Who exactly do Americans descend from? This is one of the most requested topics by our channel subscribers, and we would like to ask everyone to watch the video until the end and leave a like, as it helps us continue producing content about origins and other engaging subjects related to theology. We invite you to embark on this journey of discovery as we explore the possible connections between the biblical narrative and the origins of the people of the United States in another episode of our series, The Origin of Peoples According to the Bible. Before the arrival of Europeans, the United States of America was home to a variety of indigenous groups. The ancient descendants of Togarmah, along with the Ham, inhabited these lands. These indigenous groups had a rich cultural diversity and spoke various languages. Consequently, there was no single denomination adopted by all of them to refer to the land we now know as the United States. Each indigenous group had its own names and terms for their specific geographic areas. In the northeastern region of the United States, before the arrival of Europeans, we found the Iroquois, Algonquians, and various other Native American groups, each with their own languages and designations for their lands. In the southwestern United States, there were groups like the Navajos, Apaches, Hopis, and Pueblos, all with their unique cultures and languages. In the Great Basin, groups such as the Shoshones, Paiutes, and Utes lived, while in the Great Plains, we encountered the Sioux, Cheyennes, Comanches, and others. On the Pacific coast, tribes like the Chinooks, Nez Perce, and Haida also left their mark. These examples are just a small sample, as numerous other indigenous groups had their own cultural traditions, languages, and terms to describe their lands. Therefore, there is no single unified name given by indigenous peoples to the United States, due to the remarkable cultural and linguistic diversity among these groups. Each had their own way of referring to their specific lands and regions. The United States of America has been recognized by that name since its founding in 1776. However, throughout its history, the nation has gone through several phases and significant events. Before its independence in 1776, the regions that make up the United States today were British colonies, each with its own name, such as the Colony of Massachusetts, the Colony of Virginia, the Colony of Georgia, among others. After achieving independence, the United States was initially governed by the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union, between 1777 and 1789. During this period, the country was often referred to as the Confederation or Perpetual Confederation. With the ratification of the United States Constitution in 1787, the country began to be known as the Federal Republic. The Constitution was ratified in 1789, and the country came to be called the Perfect Union or simply the Union. During the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, the southern states that seceded from the United States formed the Confederate States of America. After the Union's victory in the Civil War, the country was restored as the United States of America, and has maintained that name to this day. It is important to note that the name United States of America has been continuously used since the ratification of the Constitution in 1787, being the official name of the country. The other designations were specific historical terms for certain periods or circumstances in the history of the United States. However, what is the origin of this name and from which language did it originate? The name United States has its roots in the English language and was derived from Archaic English. The history of this name dates back to the colonial period and the formation of the 13 British colonies in North America. In fact, the United States was already inhabited by indigenous peoples before the arrival of Europeans. In the videos of this channel, I have already addressed the ethnic origin of indigenous peoples, who have roots dating back to Tagarma. This means that the indigenous peoples who inhabited and still inhabit the United States are descendants of Tagarma, mixed with a Hamitic tribe. The history of the United States recognizes that the first inhabitants of North America were indigenous peoples, who were present on the continent long before the arrival of Europeans. These indigenous peoples, who now live in the United States, have a rich ancestry that traces back to their origins in Asia. Just as in Brazil, it has been discovered that indigenous communities are not native to the land but migrated from Asia to the Americas. These indigenous groups have occupied what is now known as the United States for centuries, and their DNA carries the heritage of their Asian ancestors. When considering the colonial history of the United States, it's important to remember that the country was predominantly colonized by the British, with some Dutch and Spanish influences in different regions. British colonists, who themselves were descendants of various European groups, arrived in what is now the United States along with Dutch and Spanish explorers and settlers. There are also mentions of the Portuguese and Spaniards, who are considered to be descendants of the ancient Celts, that is, the Celts are descendants of Riphath, one of the descendants of Japheth. This implies that white peoples also arrived in the land now known as the United States. The British, for example, have roots in various Germanic tribes, which also descend from Japheth. Most surnames in the United States have their origins in English-speaking countries due to British colonization of North America. Therefore, surnames of English origin are the most common in the United States. Surnames like Smith, Johnson, Brown, Davis, and Jones are among the most frequent in the country. However, it's important to note that due to ethnic diversity and immigration throughout the history of the United States, there is a wide variety of surnames from different origins present in the population. Surnames of German, Irish, and Italian origin, for example, are also quite common due to the massive immigration of these ethnic groups at different times in U.S. history. Spanish influence was more prominent in the Southwest, where they left a lasting impact on the culture and architecture of the region. So, in a similar way to how Brazil was colonized by the Portuguese and influenced by the Spanish, the United States was primarily colonized by the British, with additional European influences in different parts of the country. In addition to the British, Spanish, and indigenous populations, the United States also received significant African migration due to slavery. Many Africans, descendants of Ham, were brought to America as slaves, contributing to the formation of African American culture. However, it's important to clarify that most African Americans are descendants of slaves who were brought from Africa to North America and the Caribbean between 1609 and 1807, during the transatlantic slave trade, primarily during the 18th century. Most of these Africans originated from West and Central Africa. There is also a minority of more recent African American immigrants from Africa, the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. In early 1619, a ship with a group of blacks from Africa docked in the port of Point Comfort, in the U.S. state of Virginia. These Africans were the first victims of the slave trade in the United States, 404 years ago. African individuals who arrived in America formed families, intermarried, and sometimes interacted with indigenous peoples and English colonists. A racialized concept of slavery only solidified in the 18th century. By around 1775, Africans made up about 20% of the population of the 13 colonies, becoming the second largest ethnic group, just after the English. By 1860, approximately 3.5 million people were enslaved in the United States, with about 500,000 African Americans living as free individuals. During the American Civil War in 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared the freedom of all slaves. This marked a significant step towards the abolition of slavery in the United States and the emancipation of African Americans. Based on genetic research, the ancestry of African Americans has been described as follows. About 58% of African Americans have at least 12.5% European ancestry, equivalent to a great-grandparent. Approximately 19.6% of African Americans have at least 25% European ancestry, which is equivalent to a grandparent. 1% of African Americans carry at least 50% European ancestry, equivalent to a parent. Additionally, about 5% of African Americans have at least 12.5% indigenous ancestry, equivalent to a great-grandparent. The most comprehensive genetic study conducted on the African American population examined the Y chromosome, which is passed from father to son and is present only in males, and also analyzed mitochondrial DNA, which is passed from mother to son or daughter. These two genetic components provide complementary information, allowing for the tracing of paternal and maternal lineages over multiple generations in the past. This, in turn, enables the reconstruction of the genetic history of this ethnic group. The study revealed that the majority of African Americans have approximately 80% of their ancestry originating from sub-Saharan Africa. The remaining 20% is largely the result of mixtures with Europeans, with a small contribution of indigenous ancestry. The genetic research included renowned African Americans such as television host Oprah Winfrey, who underwent the analysis process and discovered that her ancestry is composed of 89% African, 8% Native American, 3% Asian, and 0% European. The study also indicated that Oprah is a descendant of slaves brought from what would now correspond to Liberia and Zambia. Based on these findings, we can conclude that the ancestry of African Americans is not limited solely to the Hamitic lineage but rather reflects a mixture between Hamitic and Japhetic peoples, including European, descendants of Japheth, ancestry, as well as indigenous and Asian influences, which can be traced back to Togarmah, the grandson of Noah and son of Japheth. In the year 1790, the African American population totaled around 700,000 people, accounting for approximately 19% of the United States population at the time. By 1860, this number had increased to 4.4 million, representing about 14% of the population. By the year 1900, the African American population had grown to 8.8 million people. In 1910, approximately 90% of African Americans lived in the southern United States. However, a significant number of individuals began migrating to the more developed North. This movement, known as the Great Migration, occurred from the 1890s to the 1970s and resulted in the migration of 6 million African Americans to the North between 1916 and 1960. By around 1990, the African American population had grown to approximately 30 million people, representing approximately 12% of the total United States population. Currently, the United States has a population of approximately 330 million people, and it is interesting to analyze the major ethnic groups that make up the nation, presenting their updated numbers. Starting with the Japhetic group, white Americans constitute the majority ethnic group, representing about 60% to 70% of the total population, depending on the source and counting methodology used. African Americans, also known as blacks or African descendants, make up a significant portion of the American population, representing approximately 13% to 15% of the total population. Hispanic Americans or Latinos form a diverse group, with ethnic origins that include Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Dominicans, among others. They represent approximately 18% to 20% of the United States population. The Asian American population is a growing group in the United States, comprising about 6% to 8% of the total population. It's worth noting that African Americans currently number around 42 million people, representing approximately 13.8% of the U.S. population. In the 2000 census, the demographic distribution of African Americans was as follows: 54.8% lived in the southern United States, 17.6% in the Northeast, 18.7% in the Midwest, and only 8.9% in the West. About 88% of African Americans resided in metropolitan areas in 2000. New York City has the largest black population in the country, with 3.6 million people, representing approximately 20% of its total population. Furthermore, it's important to note that the United States, along with Brazil, is home to one of the largest black populations outside of Africa. Indigenous and Native Alaskan peoples play a significant role in the history and culture of the United States, representing approximately 2% of the population. They have a history of interaction and intermixing with other ethnicities, resulting in a considerable cultural blend with blacks, whites, and various other ethnic groups, including Asians. In addition to the ethnic groups already mentioned, the United States is also home to diverse immigrant communities from around the world, descendants of the sons of Noah, including European Japhetites, Jewish and Arab Semites, as well as sub-Saharan African Hamites. It's also important to mention the presence of the Roma or Romani people, commonly known as Gypsies, who are a nomadic ethnic community with a global presence. They have a distinct history and culture. While they may not constitute a numerically significant ethnic group in the United States compared to other ethnicities, there are still Romani communities in the country. It's essential to note that ethnic diversity in the United States is vast, and ethnic self-identification can vary from person to person. This diversity is one of the most distinctive characteristics of American society and plays a fundamental role in the country's culture and identity. Furthermore, it's worth noting that ethnic diversity in the United States is not limited solely to surnames of British origin. This is due to immigration throughout the country's history, resulting in a wide variety of surnames from different origins in the population. German, Irish, and Italian surnames, for example, are also quite common due to the massive immigration of these ethnic groups at different points in U.S. history. The United States is indeed a land of the sons of Noah, hosting virtually every ethnicity from around the world. We would like to learn more about your own ancestry and that of your family. What ethnic origins do you and your family come from? Please share in the comments. This video is part of our series and was one of the most requested topics. Feel free to suggest new topics, as we always read and consider your ideas for future videos. Thank you for following along. If you're new to our series, you can find all the other episodes in our playlist, available on the end screen. See you soon.